There are over 15,000 surviving letters written by or to Charles Darwin, exchanged with around 2,000 correspondents. About 8,000 of those letters are here in Cambridge University Library, but the rest are scattered in collections all over the world. We find those letters, we work out what they say, and we do the research to identify the people, the places, the organisms, and the scientific terms that the letters contain. It's more complicated than it sounds.
Letters come to the project in very many different ways. When people ask me how often new letters appear, I usually say about one a week. And I would say the majority of them come from items that appear in the sale rooms or in dealers' catalogues.
Darwin's handwriting can be a bit tricky at the best of times, and you do get used to it, but it's a little unpredictable. So here's a letter where it had been transcribed lark and pigeon skins. So we just assumed they were talking about birds. But research on another letter for this volume turned up a reference to pigeon skins from Yarkand in China. And it was only that piece of the puzzle that we received later on that made us realize this had to say Yarkand.
So this is a draft of a letter that Darwin wrote on behalf of the villagers of Down to the Secretary of the Post Office. And drafts can often be more difficult to read than letters that actually went through the post. In the letter, Darwin is pleading against the possibility of cuts in the postal delivery service to Down.
This is a letter from Fanny Owen, Darwin's first girlfriend, written to him before he went on the Beagle voyage. As you can see, it looks a tremendous mess, and that's because it's a cross-written letter. This is a very unfamiliar form of letter writing to us today, and it takes a while to train your eye. You start by writing across the page from left to right in the normal way, and when the page is full, you turn it 90 degrees and continue writing. You can also see that space was left so that the letter itself could be folded to form a sort of envelope that was sealed with wax. We only have this letter because Darwin did not follow Fanny's instructions, clearly written at the end, which read, "Burn this as soon as read, or tremble at my fury and revenge."
Often just finding the pieces of a letter can be a challenge. In this letter from Fritz Muller, we have one complete sheet and several pieces which were found in different parts of the archive, including a drawing, specimens, and one piece that Darwin cut out and later pasted into his experimental notebook. We have to reassemble the letter virtually in order to work on it. And we're able to do this because there are clues, for example, Darwin's annotations in different colors of ink. So we're able to piece it back together and try to form a whole.
Now, in addition to the letters themselves, we also publish, if we have it, what we call contemporary translations, which is translations that Darwin had made of letters he received in foreign languages that he could read them more easily. In this particular case, the contemporary translation was in such a bad state we couldn't even see how many fragments there were. They were all stuck together. So the conservation staff very kindly picked them all apart for us and put them all on different pieces of paper that we could photograph so that we could cut them out and then fit them together, literally like a jigsaw, to get as much of the transcription as we could.
This is a letter from James Crichton Browne, and the joke here is that Darwin, whose handwriting is appalling, clearly found it difficult to read Crichton Browne's and has written his own reading of the words over the top.
Fritz Muller wrote all of his letters to Darwin in English, but some of them survive only in German translation. So we have to translate these letters back into English. We try to be sensitive in these translations using terminology that we know Fritz used in his letters that are written in English. So for example, we would translate a word from German, like Anpassung, not as adaptation, but as contrivance, because we know that Fritz used this word.
Dangers can also lurk behind the use of seemingly modern-sounding terms in letters. And an example of this is the word genetic that comes up in letters to Joseph Dalton Hooker, director of Kew Gardens, and from the American philosopher and mathematician Chauncey Wright. And this usage of genetic is, of course, long before the concept of genes or genetics as a discipline is founded. When Darwin and Wright use the word, it's within the context of 19th century classification. Genetic features were those that characterised a genus and denoted characters that had no obvious use, in contrast to adaptive ones. It's therefore important to explore the meaning of familiar sounding terms, especially if they don't seem to fit the science of the time.
Darwin and Hooker didn't just discuss science in their letters, they also discussed what books they were reading. In this letter, Darwin writes, "We've read your Indian novel and I liked it very much. We want to read a history of the Indian Mutiny." So what was Darwin reading? What novel? Well, we know it was recommended by Hooker, and I looked back at the letter that Hooker had sent Darwin, to which this letter is a reply. Darwin writes at the bottom of the page, "how to," and something that's illegible. Well, Cambridge University Library has lots of resources, amongst which was one which told me all the Indian novels written before 1970, amongst which was this novel, How to Manage It. And I actually read the novel myself, and I realized that it was indeed one that Darwin would have liked because it had his two major criteria for a novel, a pretty woman and a happy ending. So here it is, How to Manage It, and we did.